Now I will tell you of my grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Bob and Harriet had 2 daughters, Jeannie and Connie. Russ and Joanne have 1 son, Edward, and 2 daughters, Margaret, and Phyllis. Helen and Chai have 2 daughters, Sue and Jan. Jim and Joan have 5 sons and 1 daughter, Stephen, Jim, Brian, David, and Richard, and Kathleen. Gordon and Dorothy have 2 sons and 3 daughters, Dan, Greg, Sherry, Carol, and Sue. Catherine and Bud had 3 sons and 1 daughter, but 1 son, Michael, was killed in an automobile accident when he was 14. The other children are Paul, Christine, and Jimmy. Tom and Suzanne had 1 daughter, Emily Elizabeth. Then they adopted 4 more girls, Laura, Dorothy, Lucy, and Allison. Dorothy and Lucy were from Vietnam, Allison from Washington, D.C., and Laura from Ann Arbor. Russ and Joanne's daughter, Margaret, or Marge, a single girl, has adopted 8 children, handicapped or retarded or slow learners. Now I'd like to tell you a little of my father's personality. He was, as the saying goes, quite a character. He was against drinking and smoking very much. Always strict with his daughters, though he rarely admonished us. He would urge Mother to be more strict with us. If we were late getting home in an evening, he would say, "Now where are your girls?" It was all your girls in a case like that. He was good to us, though, and he never punished us. He had a great sense of humor. An example was, we had a neighbor in Lansing by the name of Reck. Mr. Reck was a drunkard. We would see him coming home night after night, staggering home, and my father called him Total Reck. When he and my mother were newly married, they attended a banquet. He was sitting next to a prim maiden lady. They served olives there, and as she ate them, she tucked the pits under the edge of her plate. Then when the speaker came on, she was listening to him, would pick up her olive pits and nibble on them. My dad had some too, so while she listened to the speaker, he tucked some of his pits under the plate. She nibbled them too, not knowing they were not hers. My mother was in a panic for fear he would be caught at it. He liked to write. He wrote poems and he wrote articles. He wrote many articles about marine tragedies on the Great Lakes. He was also quite an artist and drew authentic pen and ink drawings of sailing vessels to go with these articles. I'm sorry they have been lost, but they were very good. Poems, too, were his forte, though some were corny, but some were quite nice. When he was in his 90s and lived in a 3-room apartment in the house where Catherine and George Cummings lived, he would go to the grocery and buy a loaf of bread. He would carry it home on top of his head to make the children in the streets laugh, or he would wear his hat upside down for their benefit. He died in 1946, almost 96 years old. His mind stayed sharp until a few months before his death. Now about my brother Clayton. When Clayton and Laura lived in Cleveland, they joined the VFW. Laura was not musical, but she joined the band and held the horn to her lips and pretended to play. She sent us a newspaper clipping of herself marching and apparently playing, but she wasn't. It's a good thing they never asked her to play a solo. Going to that vet club, Clayton began to drink. It never interfered with his work, however, but one night he was on his way home and was rather the worse for drinking, and he came to a Nazarene church. They were having services, and he heard the singing. He went in there, and when it was over, he had been converted. He quit drinking and smoking, and he quit the VFW, and so did Laura. They joined a fundamental church. He was a changed man, and she turned too and joined the church. He became active in the church, and when Laura's mind failed and they were getting old, the pastor and wife of that church were like their own children would have been. Clayton had trouble caring for Laura, and sometimes he would call the pastor in the middle of the night. He would drive over and help them settle things. He finally got them into a good nursing home, where they later died. I sent the church $100 of his money and to thank Reverend Hay and other church members for they were so wonderful to him. And as none of us lived there, we couldn't look after them. They are buried there in Mentor, Ohio. This was to be the end of the story, but our lives go on with joys and sorrows, so I will tell of our latest tragedy. Gordon's health had been very poor for several years. He was in and out of the hospital many times, fluid around the lungs, and then all over his body. In March of '84, doctors told Dorothy and him that they could do no more for him, and he probably would not live longer than 2 to 6 months. He was moved to Alpine Manor, a nursing home, where he received excellent care. But no one could halt the cancer that had developed in his lungs. Dorothy saw him daily, and the children often, and the rest of us went 2 or 3 times a week. He turned his life over to the Lord and was ready to go. He received the last rites of the Catholic Church on September 17th and passed away September 18th. His wife and children were all there when he died. We all loved him very much, but as he had suffered so long, it was God's blessing that he took him home when he did.